Welcome to Wind of the Tao podcast. This is David Marshall. This is the first one we've done in 4 years, and we have the privilege of having Dr. Corey Miller on today. Dr. Miller is the president, that's the term, right? President of Ratio Christi.
That's right.
And Ratio Christi, you have quite a, you also have a new book, and we're going to talk about that book and some of the ideas in that book about education in America and what's wrong with it and maybe what can be made right with it. You don't have an image of that book to show us what it looks like, do you?
I do. The publisher gave me an image, but that's it. It's not ready to go yet.
So it's called The Progressive
Progressive
Miseducation of America. And there's also the term the Cultural Revolution up there on the top.
Yeah, confronting the cultural revolution from the classroom to your community.
Okay, well, that's what we'll be talking about today mainly. But as Aristotle pointed out, when you're doing rhetoric, there are three important elements: pathos, logos, and ethos. And by ethos, Aristotle meant who you are. When you're giving a speech to an audience, part of your persuasive ability arises from who they know you to be and how you present yourself. So the first question I have is, and I'd like to hear this story myself, just out of curiosity too. You've been around. You were raised in a Mormon family, apparently, and somehow you became a philosopher, and now you're the head of an apologetics organization. Please tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, so I grew up as a seventh generation Mormon in Salt Lake City, Utah. I didn't know anything other than that. That was my history, my culture, everything. Went to a non-denominational Christian camp during high school. Had a friend invite me to California to spend the summer at the beach. The condition was go to this camp. His dad will pay for it, and we'll spend the whole summer at the beach. I went there. The speaker spoke on hell. I tell people it scared the hell out of me and heaven into me. And it was so impactful that I packed my bags at the end of the summer and moved to California for my junior year of high school. And lived with a family there. The father in the home has since passed away. The mother, I just talked with her today, still in touch. And I got discipled by a youth pastor there. It was a fantastic experience. I'm still in touch with him, good friends with him, and several of the students who were part of that kind of cohort, if you will, that are now in ministry. I keep in touch with all of them. It was just a really seminal time. Went back to Utah, and that's when the pressure was put on by my extended family and culture that maybe I was a son of perdition. Maybe I, on one interpretation, was going to be worse off than Hitler in the eternal scheme of things. And so maybe, just maybe, I needed to reread the Book of Mormon this time for the sake of truth.
Did you have a good relationship with that extended family before all this came down, before they started putting the pressure on you?
Yeah, I did. And when I became a Christian, some of them I felt like just dumped me. It was over. So,
well, Rodney Stark, the famous sociologist at the University of Washington here, he argued that, and he made a pretty good argument for this, that conversion is largely social, that, this sort of pressure can, in the big scheme of things, normally this pressure is strong enough that people go along with their cohort, their friends and family and whatnot. But apparently it wasn't strong enough for you.
well, that's an interesting point. Since he was a sociologist, I would say I dumped the sociology of Mormonism, but not the theology until my conversion. And what I mean by that was my mother, I was raised, she was the official black sheep in her respective family line. My dad was a respective black sheep in his family line. And I am technically a bastard. I was an illegitimate child, illegitimately conceived. They never married. So I was raised in a Mormon 7-generation trajectory on one hand and 5 generations the other one. But in that immediate family situation, it was distinct. And that's why I said my extended family put the pressure on. My mother was a smoker. I continued to go to church. I was kind of raised religiously by my grandfather, her father, and then my grandparents on the other side. So I was serious about Mormonism as a kid. In fact, I delayed my baptism at age 8 because I knew the tension that you get baptized, it's baptismal regeneration. They told me that my sins would be washed away. I would have a blank slate. And I knew as a child that if I was going to spend eternity with Heavenly Father, the expression we use, that I needed to have a completely blank slate to get into celestial glory. So I said, well, what happens if I sin after baptism? Well, you get marks on your slate. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I struggled. And I thought, what I'll do is I'll delay baptism until I'm 88 years old, beat the system, and get into celestial glory. But what if, just what if I didn't get baptized by the proper priestly authority and I died before that? So I finally capitulated at 9. But I felt the tension that a lot of Mormons feel. And that is sort of this universalist idea, try your best and God will make up the rest, versus true Mormonism, according to the Book of Mormon, which is become perfect by this lifetime or else. I felt that tension. And so anyway, I in my seriousness, I also saw a lot of Mormons in my ward, in my community, in my sociological structure that didn't really accept me. And probably because my mom was a smoker, she was single, I was illegitimately born, and I rejected that culture, even though I retained the theology. I knew nothing else. And without having a father figure raising me, I felt like the Heavenly Father was my father. And so I continued to believe that, but I disbelieved in the culture, at least for now.
I hate to go down too many rabbit holes here, but that kind of reminds me of Paul Witz's book, Faith of the Fatherless, I think it was called. Are you familiar with that by any
Yeah,
chance?
I am. That's right.
How do you feel about that? His thesis is basically that atheists tend to be people who didn't have very good fathers in their lives.
I don't know. I mean, for me, I saw all my friends and neighbors, and the big word that if you get 5 Mormons, you got 6 different statements. Families are forever, families are forever, families are forever. I didn't have the family. I had a mom. My dad was never there for me. And what it did, instead of making me reject God, is that I clung to Heavenly Father. He was my father. So I kept that. I didn't like the culture, and I just assumed it was, my culture, until I got to California and I saw the grace of God the first time. I saw real Christianity in people, and I heard the gospel for the first time ever. Grace made sense in the background of sin. I didn't take sin seriously before because in Mormonism it's sort of a universalistic idea. And so when I came back to Utah, then my senior year of high school to graduate, that's when the pressure was on. And now I'm reading for the sake of truth and not tradition. And now I'm interested in truth. Before this, I did have a GPA that was literally, I've got the report card to show it, 0.666. And I wasn't an academic in the least bit, but now knowledge is important to me. And I learned that knowledge is central, not peripheral to the Christian experience. That's what the goal is the knowledge of God, as it was for Aristotle, it was for Jesus and a lot of other thinkers. But Jesus, this is eternal life, to know God.
Well, if you didn't have a strong father figure in your life and you came from a background that in many cases leads to kind of a dysfunctional existence, really, um, but you managed to, were there some people who were strong influences on you intellectually at that early stage?
I didn't have a lot of intellectuals in my life, but someone, when I was a new Christian and I ran into some other Christians that they looked like bad boys, like I kind of looked at the time, they were former Mormons too. They were long hairs and they were evangelists downtown in Salt Lake. They were all former Mormons, and they were passing out tracts. And one of them threw Josh McDowell's Evidence Demands a Verdict my way. I had gone through a small period of skepticism because of wondering about the Book of Mormon being now false. And now that I no longer believe in the church authorities to cover for me, I was always taught that the Bible was full of holes. But it didn't matter because you had the church authorities who had modern revelation. Now I don't have that. What am I going to do with this Bible? What about God's existence? Which God? And so that's what I did to get introduced to philosophy and comparative religions. And along that path came Christian apologetics. And I used it the first time in my first classroom ever at the Salt Lake Community College. Got kicked out of the classroom for proselytizing, just doing what the professor was doing. But I called the legal authorities at that time, and the college president was sufficiently impressed that he forced the professor to put me back in the classroom, give me an A for the semester as long as I shut up. And that kind of has, you know, created my track record now with Ratio Christi too. So, long story short, I went through Bible college, seminary, became a pastor. Heart of hearts was to do evangelism. I now had a strategic heart, but an intellectual mind, and I wanted to get into the universities, and so I got accepted at Purdue University for philosophy, and to me that was like the Trojan horse entering into the city of Troy. And I had an opportunity to do that, and that's what took me out to the Midwest a couple of decades ago. I switched from biblical studies into philosophy, and first PhD didn't go well. Um, I was fighting for it the whole way, but in my fifth year, I was all but dissertation. Told I had too much of a faith perspective, and so I had to cash out with a 5-year master's degree at Purdue. And that's what made me want to go and reach professors. I was already reaching graduate students at Purdue
What
with
did
a
they mean by too much of a faith perspective?
well, yeah, that was what was odd because I was doing it in part on the virtue of faith with Maimonides and Aquinas with Aristotle in the background. And I looked at the functional equivalent philosophically to Aristotle's master virtue, phronesis, prudence, practical wisdom. And the functional analog for Moses Maimonides, an Aristotelian Jewish philosopher, was faith. And the functional analog philosophically for Aquinas, a Aristotelian Christian philosopher, was faith. Faith played the same role as phronesis. And so that's what the dissertation was about. But the advisor was a Jewish Maimonidean scholar, thought that I was imposing a Protestant version of faith on his beloved Moses Maimonides, and it came down to an exegetical issue. He had dropped me with a 4-line email, and I got him on the phone, and 15 minutes later, I had him converted. But it didn't matter. He wasn't going to be my advisor anymore. And an atheist, ancient philosopher in the department was looking for ways to get me out. And she used that to communicate to the rest of the faculty what had happened, even though I still had a full cadre of
So,
advisors and committee. I couldn't even get to Haifa, Israel, a guy whose views I was defending, Maimonidean
so
scholar, wouldn't even take it. I was done.
in a sense, I get the feeling because this is what this book is all about, isn't it? It's about sticking up for truth in the academy. And one of the things that bothers me about what goes on in a lot of classrooms, and I'm not saying that I know what goes on in all the classrooms because I don't, I hate bullying. And a professor has power, if you want to go to Foucault or whatever, they're right about this. Power is very important in an academic setting. And it sounds like they're using their power in an unjust, unfair way. And is there a straight line between your experience and the book that you just wrote?
Well, um, in some respects, yes, because at the time I was also then now working on a second PhD. I was now doing faculty commons and I was going after professors. And I was teaching, I'd taught at Indiana University for a dozen years in philosophy and comparative religion. So I was doing all of that at once. I was now leading the faculty ministry at Purdue, teaching at IU, and then working on a second PhD attempt from the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. Same dissertation topic. I had a former pastor who turned gay in my ethics class at Indiana University, charged me with creating a suicidal environment. I use all and only atheist textbooks to cover over myself. And frankly, I feel like sometimes Christians have to do that, whereas atheists don't use, Christian authors by contrast. But I felt like I had to. And so this author was pro gay, anti God, anti Bible. And when it got to human sexuality, I gave a biomedical natural law argument from harm to show the other side. and he charged me with creating a suicidal environment. The university was going to get rid of me like that. And two atheist students of mine came to my defense, took the flash drive that they record all my lectures on, and went to the university and said, look, Dr. Miller did, or Professor Miller at the time, did nothing wrong. We disagree with his view on God and human sexuality, but we record all his lectures. We're getting A's in his class. He did nothing wrong. And if you don't at least listen to the lecture, we are leaving this university because it is not a free thinking university, and we're going to go somewhere else. So between that, those two atheists, and Alliance Defending Freedom, who took my case pro bono, I was exonerated from that. I continued teaching the classes, same classes, continued working on the PhD. And then when I got to my dissertation stage, it happened again. God has this sense of humor that I don't always appreciate. And I ended up having a guy on my external examiner committee who I just debated last week on Facebook. And it was the first time I had talked with him since my defense a decade ago. And he's no longer a guy. And in fact, he was going through transition right at that time. And he's written an open
That's debatable,
article,
but
yeah, to the Guardian, to J.K. Rowling, calling her out for her trashing on trans and defense of lesbians and feminists, right? And he said, I want to thank you because I raised four daughters and I read all of your Harry Potter series to them. And it was those books that helped me to see my true self. This guy has written on Augustinian ethics. And his name now is Sophie Grace instead of Timothy Chappell. So, you know, I finished the dissertation, the defense, all went successful, I will say. 2 months later, I had this organization called Ratio Christi call me up and say they've got a job opening. And I said, I'll take it. What is it? President. That was 10 years ago. And so since then, we've had 150 legal inquiries, 4 federal victories, 5 appellate court victories, 2 SCOTUS assists, and we gave Joe Biden a healthy going away present in December on his way out after a 4-year litigation with the Department of Education. And that's not what we're supposed to be doing in Ratio Christi.
well,
Ratio
you get
Christi,
that help pro bono apparently. You
yeah,
must. I mean, that would be huge legal bills otherwise.
you know, ADF looks at us as their favorite campus ministry. They make big money on us, and we like them because they help keep the lights on for us, keep the platform up, and we go in and we try to do the surgical change of hearts and minds inside of the academy, including in law schools.
Well,
So we're in
maybe
partnership.
at this point is a good point to introduce your ministry a little bit more for those who don't know anything about Ratio Christi.
So Ratio Christi's been around as a 501c3 since 2011. I've been there since 2015. And it means the reason of Christ. It's an apologetics evangelism organization on campuses. What separates us from all other apologetics ministries is that we're on the campus, the most influential institution shaping civilization. What shapes us or separates us differently from the rest of the campus ministries now is that we focus intently on apologetics evangelism. We don't do traditional Bible studies, prayer groups, and Thursday night barn dances. Our people can't dance anyway, but we
That sounds like fun actually. We could probably bring that back.
we have traditional weekly meetings. We do annual big events, sometimes debates, sometimes events on human sex trafficking. We'll bring in ex-porn stars, sex slaves, let them give their story, and then bring in philosophers to debate God and morality and you know human trafficking and so forth like that. We have a high school division that helps out in churches and homeschools and Christian schools that helps students to prepare for the onslaught of what they're about to face at the university, not just to survive, but to thrive. We have a professors division. We have international. We're in 15 different countries, several chapters in Canada with our board, bank, and bylaws up there, 5 to 7 chapters in South Africa, for example. And then we now have a PhD student only ministry where we fund bright young PhD students that get into top 100 universities with the goal of launching missional professor student chapters who are going to go into secular universities. And right now we are at Oxford, UCLA, Rutgers, Texas A&M, University of Tennessee, Oregon State, Baylor, Florida State. And we hope in 40 or 50 years to follow the cultural Marxists through the long march through the institutions and reclaim.
Well, that would seem to depend on getting into the institutions in the first place, and if there is a locked door there, as there, there's different sociologists who've done studies on this. I think George Yancey, I think Stark probably talked about this some too. What you were talking about, your experience a couple decades ago or so, um, when I was at
Harder,
the university. What's that?
even harder now in some respects.
Yeah, a couple of decades ago, when I went to the University of Washington, one of my professors was Dr. Donald Treadgold, a historian. He had a history department and a Christian. Um, Rodney Stark was there at the time in the sociology department. He told me that he didn't have a lot of interaction with other professors so much. It wasn't a very social university, so he ended up going to Baylor in the end. And then in the same department, you have later on, we have a woman by the name of Robin DiAngelo, who
Hmm.
wrote a book called, oh, what was the book that she wrote? It was a big hit along with that gentleman over there in Boston,
Ability.
Kendi, yeah. White Fragility, right. She was from the same department as Rodney Stark was after he left. Uh,
Wow.
so
Wow.
that's an interesting mark of change. You don't want to overgeneralize from a couple examples, but how would you say things have changed in the last 20 years?
Wow. So my book is like three different books. The first third is what the bleep just happened to our country. This is no longer grandma's America. And I look at everything from academia to politics to seminaries to campus ministries to K through 12 to churches. It's crystal clear we are in a revolution, a soft revolution, but a cultural revolution nonetheless. I mean, you've got Democrat presidential candidates now that are on the Republican presidential cabinet, a Kennedy for all people, Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, and everybody's wanting to call themselves cultural Christians, from Richard Dawkins to um,
Peterson, Jordan
Holland,
Peterson.
Jordan Peterson, existentialist Christian. A pejorative term in the past is now like a cool term because they've now been able to see culturally a major macro competitor to the religion that the new atheists were trying to destroy, and now they want to be our friends because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And poor old Dawkins loses his Humanist of the Year award by the woke atheist mob that gave it to him a quarter of a century before. And so Peter Boghossian, someone from the Northwest that I, prior to 2020, to George Floyd and to COVID, he and I were traveling universities together on lecturing on viewpoint diversity because we could see the cultural Marxism getting ready to hit the fan. And it did. And then Boghossian said something to me like, I told Richard that if he's not careful, he's going to be speaking only at Ratio Christi chapters in the future or something like that. And Boghossian has since terminated his employment because, he thought that it was
And
completely
state.
yeah, and Portland State, and he thinks that the education system was totally gone, and they wanted to start the new university, the University of Austin, that's much like Grove City or Hillsdale or Patrick Henry, that is off limits from federal dollars, right? And then you've got Jordan Peterson wanting to start the new university idea online, and other people saying it's gone, it's gone, it's gone, and I'm saying no. The second third of my book is saying, how did this happen? And I say, look no further than the universities. Politics is downstream from culture, culture from education, and the apex of education is the university. But we started these institutions almost entirely, and certainly in America, 1636 by the Pilgrims or Puritans, and that lasted 250 years up until 1840, when almost every college president was also a member of the clergy and would give the capstone class on moral philosophy. Not until 1880 did things begin to unravel. Church and chapel attendance were still required at almost all the colleges in the country. That's 250 years in the making there. And then from 1880 to 1930, the battle was on. And that's because we hardly had any universities in the United States that had graduate schools. And so they would send them all over the pond, mostly to Germany. And someone has asked, has anything good come from Galilee? I mean, Germany, since the Reformation. Um, and over there, you've got Kant. You Kant no ultimate reality. And you've got Schleiermacher now, the father of modern liberal theology. And then you've got Hegel and you've got Feuerbach,
Schopenhauer.
Schopenhauer and Freud and Nietzsche and Marx and Engels. And someone, has asked, how in the world could the Nazis, how did the Germans do what they did in World War II? I
Well,
say, look,
The French have made quite a few contributions to this sort of philosophy in recent years.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and so and that'll come up too. But part of revolution number one was 1880 to 1930. All these graduates are now coming back and they're taking over Harvard and Princeton and Yale and Columbia and the rest. And the conservatives, how we lost, let's say, Princeton as a Presbyterian sectarian school that became secular but not secular humanist until the new scientific revolution and the revolutionaries came over, and suddenly all the colleges started calling themselves scientists. And so you went from politics, a branch of ethics, to political science. You went from psychology, the study of the soul, to the Department of Psychological Sciences, the study of the brain and the central nervous system. And so the sciences all took over for the next century. And in the last 20 years, this millennium, the Ivant Terrible of Atheism, Richard Dawkins, that you've written about a lot, he was sort of like the Robespierre of the French Revolution. The last 20 years was like the cherry on top of that 100-year reign. It was the reign of terror. And Dawkins created the guillotine, but then he got guillotined by his own guillotine because something else was happening right at the end of the 1930s when the dust was settling from the first ideological revolution in the universities. Another revolution was just being born again in Germany from this little school called the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory. Jewish leaders and globalist socialists instead of national socialists. And when the Germans rose to power as the Nazis, it was not a good place to be in Germany. And so they took off and went to Columbia and Brandeis and UCLA and other places. And down south in the Axis powers, as I call it, of Marxism, you had this imprisoned guy named Antonio Gramsci. Mussolini imprisoned him. He never got out, but some people have said that he's the most dangerous of all the cultural Marxists. His views got mediated to the English-speaking world right
I'm not
here in
familiar.
Indiana.
I'm not familiar with him.
Oh, okay. So Gramsci, for the audience, he divided society. All the neo-Marxists are trying to figure out, why did Marx's predictions not come true? Why did it happen here and not there,
Mhm.
among this group of people and not that? And
Yeah,
so
I'm still getting that.
that's right. So what happened was Gramsci.
The funny thing is, the young people who say those sorts of things nowadays don't realize how long a history that question is. That whole
Right.
thesis, real Marxism has never been tried. TM, your grandparents were already saying that. Okay,
Yeah.
let's try again. Why
And
not?
so Gramsci said, you know what? The reason why we've not been able to have a frontal assault like in the Russian Revolution or the Chinese Revolution, that we're prepared for this. The West, it's just incapable or intractable. There's something about it. It's like a castle and moat. Every time you lob shells at it, it's like a living cell. It regenerates itself. What is it about it? So Gramsci divided political society and civil society. He said political society is government and law enforcement and military. We can't do that in the West. You have to go after the soft tissue of culture. Civil society, that is academia, media, and ecclesia, church. And until we've sufficiently ensconced ourselves into that soft tissue of culture, a frontal assault is completely off limits. And so between the Frankfurt School up north and Gramsciites down south, and what happened was it got mediated in Indiana at Notre Dame by a Marxist professor named Joseph Buttigieg, father of Mayor Pete.
Is that
Uh,
right?
Talking about
The
queer,
world is small indeed.
yes, critical queer theory. He's not just gay. There is some depth behind that as well. And so I get into this in the book, and I show that, yeah, about 50.
Do you talk about Howard Zinn along the way there?
I don't talk about Zinn, but I do bring in your other friends that you mentioned a little bit later. And I say this is sort of like the Vichy government in World War II. The French came in about 15, 20 years later, and that was Foucault and Derrida and Lyotard, the postmodernists. And postmodernism, it's a fishy thing, and it slips through your hands oftentimes, but people can characterize it against a meta narrative and is relativism. But if it's relativistic, shouldn't all of their politics be all the way from one end of the spectrum on the left to the other end of the spectrum on the right in an equal distribution? Every single one of them, for the first and second generations, were all members of the French Communist Party or sympathizers of it. So this stuff that began from revolution number one, scientific naturalism, in the modern era with scientific naturalism and Marx, neo-Marxism wedded to Freudian sexuality, and then Gramsci's Cultural Revolution became an amalgamated postmodern cultural Marxism. And the way that it did that is because, as exactly what you said, David, they looked over as the Nazis got defeated. Um, these guys were like, yes, our only enemy is gone. Now we're the only socialists left. And look at Russia. That's where it's at. And then all of a sudden, Khrushchev came out and said, oh, yeah, Stalin did all that stuff. Oh, shoot. No, it's never really been tried. Mao, he's our man. If he can't do it, no one can. And then all of a sudden, whoa, Mao's even worse. No, he didn't. We're
Oh,
going
the
to.
Khmer Rouge.
It's postmodernism.
Sendero Luminoso.
Yeah. And so all of these guys came over and they started teaching at our biggest universities. You go through the 60s, it wasn't completely successful. And now I'm getting around to your question. At the end of the 70s, the question was, okay, what are we going to do? Workers of the world unite. It's no longer on the factory floor. The new workers of the world are the academic elites. Now we're talking about the long march through the institutions, and they all
Right.
began pouring into their next long-term assault was academia. And in the 90s, the ratio was just 2.3 to 1. Steven Pinker writes about this as well, and I know you've done
2.3 what to 1 of what? Well,
liberal to conservative professors across
okay.
departments in the universities. It was
Right. And
3 to 1.
you've got, I mean, anthropology is obviously a different can of worms from the
Yeah,
physics department, for example, or the
that's right.
economics department.
That's right. So 2.3 to 1 across the university divide: humanities, hard sciences, social sciences.
Oh, let me say something before you go on. We do have at least one other person who wants to ask questions. Let me ask a couple more questions about things that you've already brought up, and I'll see if he has something to ask. Go ahead. Uh, One thing that you mentioned, well, probably let me ask first of all, what is your solution to this problem? Because you mentioned, get a bunch of Christians in history, in philosophy, and other fields, get them involved in academia. Hopefully, they'll get by the. Apparently, you think they can get by the gatekeepers. What if they can't get by the gatekeepers? Secondly, you have another part of this plan in the last part of your book. How should Christians address the problems that you describe?
I tell people we are living in the second revolution right now. From academia that went from 2.3 to 1 in the mid 90s to now 12 to 1 for those who are retiring, and 23 to 1 who just got tenure, and 27 to 1 in the Ivy Leagues. And at Yale last month in their social sciences and humanities, it's 78 to 1. It seems like we're going to be doomed. Well, we need to start equipping, and we need to realize the power that the university has influencing not just Americans downstream, but 1/3 of all world leaders, presidents, prime ministers, dictators. They get an academic degree from the U.S. university.
Let me point something out here that you might find interesting. For the last year and a half, I've been teaching at Peking University in Beijing, which is where China's top students go, along with Tsinghua University across the street. And my impression is they've been more deeply influenced in some ways by the American left than they have by the Chinese Communist Party.
Wow, really?
I there are some people who bring up kind of conservative talking points, and there are people who quote Marx once in a while on the other hand, on the other side. But I actually hear more, I think, from people who, especially when we're talking, when I was teaching American culture, of course, but even when I was teaching public speaking and critical thinking, I get so many talking points that came directly from it sounds like from the Western or the American left more than I do
That is
from Chinese Communist
absolutely
Party.
fascinating. Just one anecdotal story, and then I'll get to this third part in the solution also. When I was doing faculty and PhD ministry at Purdue, while I was in the philosophy department, one of the nursing Chinese professors sent a new Chinese student to me because she said he's a philosopher and he's here for 1 year. I met with them and I said, hey, so you want to join our group? We meet at this hour and this day. Here's the book we're going to go through. Now tell me your story. How did you become a Christian? Were your parents Christian? And he said, no, they're atheist. No, they're Buddhist. And I said, oh, well, then how did you become a Christian? He goes, actually, I'm an atheist. The Chinese government's paying my way over here to come over and study Marxism, Western Marxism at the US. And I said, oh, well, maybe you want to be in a different group of ours, a seeker group over here, instead of this integrating missional professor group. And he says, no, I'm actually very interested in this group because I'm fascinated why people in America take religion so seriously. He stopped attending the Marxist class that I had taken by a Marxist professor at Purdue, started attending our group. He becomes a Christian, and then he goes back to China to finish his dissertation now as a Christian. But I am experiencing at Purdue, where we have one of the largest Chinese populations as well.
I've seen that.
Um, I'm I think I'm resonating with what you're saying here. So I want to come back to this then. It seems like it's doomed. The universities are doomed. We can't do this. But I take you back to something else. What is actual entails what is possible. If the first revolution happened against the majority and took over, and then it happened again, it shows that it has happened not once, but twice, and it can happen again. Al Mohler, I interviewed him in the book because he took over an entire institution that was a liberal institution. Chris Rufo and DeSantis have done something similar down in Florida differently from the outside in as opposed to the inside out. And then Alvin Plantinga in my field of philosophy established an entire beachhead in philosophy of religion where the atheist Quentin Smith said, uh-oh, everybody, what, wake up, smell the coffee. It's possible that 1/3 of all philosophers in philosophy of religion right now are conservative Christians. I think he was exaggerating, but his point is well taken. We have a Normandy beachhead in the most important academic degree in academia. And that's because behind every PhD is a doctorate of philosophy in XYZ. So it can happen again. And moreover, we're already en route to do this. And once we start to follow the Marxist cues on this, we don't have to do this at Yale or Princeton or Harvard, but they only have 10,000, 15,000 students. Why not go after Purdue and Texas A&M and Florida State that have 70 to 90,000 students, and they're pumping out more PhDs? So yeah, while the New York Times is still the paper of record, the USA Today's got far more subscribers. So we don't have to do what seems like mission impossible at Harvard. We can do the end run around this, and we must reclaim substantial ground in these universities. Otherwise, we just continue to send our people there, and parents and grandparents are literally paying for the apostasy of their own children.
One point that I don't know if it was Stark brings this up or who brings this up is that, and having taught uh, at the high school level too, and even middle school for a little while, um, it doesn't begin in college. It begins in fifth grade, from what I've seen, at least. The brainwashing, if you want to say, of young people, especially it seems young women are particularly vulnerable to this sort of thing. Um, you know, I had trans students, seventh grade. She thought she was a boy. She insisted she be described as a boy. Uh, she didn't look like or act like a boy. I mean, she definitely was a very, very interested in boys in a very feminine way, I thought, from my observations. But that was what she was being put into her mind by some of her friends in seventh grade already. Now, when they get to college, is this going to help if they've already been brainwashed before they get to college?
Well, that's why we also have a high school division. And one thing to note is this: whereas Foucault is without doubt the most cited scholar in the history of the world on Google Scholar, no question. The number 4 in the social sciences is the Brazilian Marxist Paulo Freire. And Paulo Freire, in his bestseller, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, that influenced, he actually wrote the foreword, I think, to Black Liberation Theology, James Cone's book. Paulo Freire is the K through 12, is the colleges of education in the United States. He is the guy that they all know. My daughter is an elementary ed major right now at Purdue. I sift through her syllabi. And this is Purdue, where 1/3 of the students are engineers, where math is actually still math. The bridges have to stay up, right? As opposed to down the street, Indiana University, which is a humanities school. And this is Purdue where this is happening. They took over the colleges of education that trains K through 12 educators, even Christian K through 12 educators, even Christian K through 12 educators that go teach in Christian schools. We need to get back into the colleges of education at the secular universities, and we can. And so I think the game plan that we have here, what I do in the third part of the book is I say, okay, it's time for a third revolution. And that is enough of the scandal of the evangelical mind. Mark Knoll wrote 30 years ago, almost this month. We need to get rid of the menace of mindless Christianity. The pastors have got to stop being shaped by sociology and culture, instead by theology and scripture. The percentage of pastors holding a biblical worldview, according to the recent polls, is 37%. And if you
Well,
count evangelical non-denom pastors, it's 51 to 57%. So they're too enamored with,
I'm somewhat skeptical of those sorts of surveys, but and the point that you also bring up about Sunday school teachers. Don't expect your Sunday school teacher to educate your children in a Christian worldview. That's something that bothers me. It's hard to find Sunday school teachers to begin with, so they pretty much have to accept whoever you can get. But it seems like it would be nice if we could find a way of helping the church be a better resource. And that was really the point here of speaking of third revolutions. You are familiar with this book, which we talked about at one point, The Third Education Revolution. Vishal Mangawati and I was the co-editor of that book, which also seemed to put the onus on the church in some ways for educating Christians. And so I think we're pretty much on the same wavelength on that. But what role, besides parachurch organizations like your own, what role can the church play, and how can if oh, I'm sorry, Edward is raising his hand. Let me just
yes.
give him a chance to find. Let me quickly answer that question, and then go ahead, Ed. Go ahead and give you a chance. Go ahead, Corey. Why don't you give me your overview on that question, and then we'll see what Ed has to say.
Yeah, I basically say we need to be showing people that Christianity is good for the world. It's not oppressive, wicked, or evil.
And that's
Hospital buildings, universities, government.
I'm right. I'm just finishing a book called How Jesus Liberated Women.
Yeah, I do.
100 pages, the whole story.
That it's reasonable and that it's true. So it's a commercial for Ratio Christi and like ministries. And then it's a clarion call I write specifically to pastors, to parents and grandparents, to parachurches, to philanthropists and donors, to political allies, and to prayers, all hands on deck. Not everyone is called to go back into the universities like we are, but everybody needs to be prepared for the ideological poison coming out of the universities, because you can no longer hide in your churches. They're coming there. You can't go to your campus ministries. It's coming into your families. It's coming into your closets. And then I end the book with the chapter, MAGA and the Morning After. Can America be made great again if it's not made good again? And I say no. We need a Jesus-like revolution. And whenever we look at these fancy revolutions that are revivals, as the University of Virginia sociologist said in his book, To Change the Culture, if you want to change the culture, you have to recapture the institutions. That's how it always goes. And we look at what happened at Asbury. We look at what happened at Azusa, at Yale, and at Wittenberg. Dr. Martin Luther, the university. All of these revivals are typically connected to college or universities, including the Protestant Reformation. So it isn't all hands on deck. I am speaking to the pastors. I've got cherry picked areas out there, and to parents in particular and their role and responsibility, and to donors. Stop funding those who hate you. Fund those whose views align
Well,
with your view.
to cite Stark again, Stark argues that not only early Christianity, but any kind of cult, Hindu cult, guru cult, they generally be concentrated among. There's a lot of PhDs in Sai Baba's cult or any kind of Hindu cult you like. Um, so it seems that you're right that there's always a very strong education. Highly educated people tend to be at the forefront of a lot of new religious movements. Edward, can you tell us how you pronounce your last name? Because I don't know how to pronounce it. I can't hear you. Let me see. Is it muted? It's not muted here. Let me get my tech guy. James.
Yeah. So while he's doing that, let me just, for the sake of the audience, kind of clarify too. When I'm talking about political alliances, I'm talking about everyone from Elon Musk, who kept free speech alive through Twitter, through Alliance Defending Freedom, legal
Okay, I need to
cases,
get Edward in there.
and through like our state legislatures. Indiana University, for example, has just passed legislation that requires viewpoint diversity in order to gain and retain tenure. This could be very significant going forward when other red states adopt and adapt this for their states. It doesn't mean we're, flushing the system completely, but at least it gives libertarians and free thinking people that are liberal and certainly conservatives and Christians a fighting chance now with the wind at our back and with the DEI, DIE stuff on retreat because of the political schema that we have. At least it opens it up and gives us more of a fighting chance. We have a
Okay,
window.
Edward. I think Edward is available. Can we hear you now?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Tell us how you
Hey,
pronounce your name first.
the O is silent, so you'd say Croteau.
Croteau. Okay,
Yep.
Mr. Croteau, please ask your question.
Well, you guys, both of you I'm big fans of you. I follow you, David, a lot. And Corey, with this book, I'm very excited. My question goes back to what David said a minute ago. I've taught for 25 years apologetics in a church. And I do agree with David. How do we get people like myself, the average person, into churches to work with high schoolers and young college kids? Because I do believe we've got to prepare them before they get hit with all these leftist professors in college.
Look, there are some really, really good pastors out there and really good churches. But the statistics, while David, you might question those, and it's like, who was it that said, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics? Mark Twain. um, but the pastorate is incredibly unhealthy in America right now. And this is the 30th year anniversary with Mark Knoll writing about the scandal of the evangelical mind. This Friday in Chicago, I'm speaking at an apologetics conference, and my talk is the third revolution and the scandal of the evangelical mind. Our chapters, our Ratio Christi chapter directors, find it really difficult sometimes, not just to face off with the university administrators, but with pastors who don't see the relevance, who are more hostile than hospitable to Christian apologetics in the church. They're more engaged with skinny jeans and fog machines or the latest fad or fetish than they are with that. So,
Corey, I apologize to you because I have to get off in a few minutes. But what I'm hearing you say is, Ed, we don't have an answer yet because of the situation with pastors.
no, some of the pastors we have to do end runs around, and we have to
Okay.
just ignore them and reach their congregation despite them. And we have to work in tandem with the pastors who actually care. Look, Christian apologetics is getting it's not on life support, it's growing. Seminaries are wanting it, other pastors are starting to get it. With respect to this book tour, I am going to be speaking in our chapter, but at each chapter I speak at, I'm having them get me into a church so that I can widen and broaden the perspective. I wrote this book, Ed, so that Christians who aren't part of our industry wake up and smell the coffee. What just happened to America? I try to explain to them, and then I go and say, this is why we need to not excommunicate the life of the mind. We want to follow Jesus. And so
Mm-hmm.
I make this about Jesus, and Jesus commanded us to love God with our minds. And First Peter says, command to be prepared, and the apologetics verses there, where we've got the head, the hands, and the heart there. I help people to see through Barna material as well that we are living in Mars Hill, and we've been there for an entire generation. And we think that what we're doing, going to the synagogue in Acts 2 and giving them the four spiritual laws, which were successful when we already believed in God, believed in the Bible, and in a Judeo-Christian ethic. We no longer believe that in our culture. We've been in Acts 17 for an entire generation. More and
Right.
more pastors are starting to catch it. I'm the keynote speaker at the largest apologetics conference this semester. Another conference Friday night, at the Nobix conference coming up. I'm going on a book tour. I'm trying to get in churches. That's my major audience that I'm trying to get in for the next 12 to 18 months.
I have to, I apologize. I have to catch a meeting, but I'm buying your book. I will promote you and I'll be in touch because we communicate once in a while about.
Amen.
Thanks for participating, Ed.
If I could add one thing to Ed too, is that for pastor sakes, we call it discipleship. And for pastor sakes, we even changed our vision statement so that they could better resonate. It's thoughtful Christianity, where when you think about she's sure a thoughtful girl. You think about the compassion and being considerate in the heart, as well as rational and reflective in the mind. So it's a double entendre. We do that for the sake of the pastorate. We
Yeah.
have to be able to speak their language, and apologetics just isn't it.
Well, I reminded my pastor that Jesus did say, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind is in there too. And he didn't, he ended up preaching a series on loving God with your mind a year later. So it must have sunk in at some level.
Some
And
are
he, and
getting
he, and he yeah, he put a couple pictures of my books up there on the screen. And so I guess it helped a little bit. Pastors are, you know, not everybody has a nose, not everybody's a hand.
That's right. So what we've done then, David, if I can make one final point, and then you can close it out, or we can go from there, is that pastoring is hard today. They're up against a lot. Parenting is hard. You have to have two parent incomes, it seems like oftentimes now. And maybe that's our own fault because we've created such an economic climate where it seems to be required sometimes. And so it's really hard. You're both exhausted when you get home. How do you train your kid in the way they should go? We have created a set of resources now. We're not just boots on the ground, and that's why I have my combat boots up there. We're not just about books, Socratic beard stroking. We're about boots on the
Oh,
ground.
where do you have your combat boots?
I have combat boots right up there.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. And we've created these booklets, over 50 of them, that are intended to get into the churches, to get into the homeschools, to get into the youth groups, to get into the families. They have the best scholars, from Wayne Grudem to Steve Meyer in the Discovery Institute to William Lane Craig, everything dealing with why does God allow evil, the problem of science and scripture, and the reliability of the Bible, classical apologetics, to the new cultural apologetics, everything on race, class, sex, gender, and ethnicity. These are all written by PhDs at the 11th grade reading level, 25 pages or 9,000 words. And we've got over 50 of these booklets right now and more coming in. They're digital and printable. And so these things people can take a bite out of and start to have introductions to Christian thought or thoughtful Christianity, or the dirty little word apologetics.
Okay, one final question. Imagining that there might be some listeners who themselves are going to a highly secular university, not in Indiana, but in more left wing parts of the country or other countries, perhaps. and they might feel kind of alone. Now, I know that you have an organization to meet that need where students can get together and talk about apologetics. I was actually part of that organization for a little while. Do you have any other advice for students in that situation? Because you were in kind of in that situation yourself for a long time, weren't
Yeah,
you?
yeah. So they can get on our website and they can look around at ratiochristi.org. Or if you want to read the first chapter of the book for free right now, it doesn't even come out. It's on pre-order by Amazon right now, and it's going to be an audiobook too. I
And it's
narrated
due
it
out when?
October 15th, but it's on Amazon right now. But if you want to read the first chapter for free right now, you can go to ratio.link/PMA for Progressive Miseducation America. And you can find the book on there. You can invite me to your churches or your campuses or conferences to speak. You can look at our RC Press store right from there to look at those booklets. You can navigate around. You can find RC College Prep high school chapters. We even have some middle school chapters. You can look at where our chapters are located. And if there isn't already a chapter there at that university, you can help us start a chapter or at least stay in touch with us so that we can do so. Look, we are on 100 plus campuses at the undergrad level. There are 4,000 universities, colleges out there. We need to be on 3,900 more yesterday. And so we need everybody who's listening to this to put on boots and not just books and go to town. We need to reclaim the intellectual life of Christ at the universities, the most influential institution shaping civilization. And before someone in the audience says, well, it's the church that's influencing the civilization, no, it's not. And here's why I say this. The statistics right now are that 30% of Americans go to church every week. If you want to say almost every week, it's 39%. But exactly 39% of 18 to 24-year-olds are enrolled in college. If you go to church every week, you get 52 sermons a year. The freshmen across the street at Purdue are going to get 60 sermons their first month of their freshman year.
On a variety of topics. Um, I know that you have an international wing as well, and of course, I'm an international person with more roots in Japan and China in particular. You've been talking about Germany, and we've talked a little bit about France as well. Are you have you do you have fact what's the word,
We've got
roots?
boots now that are hitting the ground in places like Indonesia, Malaysia, Pakistan, India. Uh, I don't think we have anything in South Korea, Japan, or China yet.
Of course not China. China would be difficult, for the obvious reasons. Okay, Corey. Well, it was great to have you on the show, and lots of luck with your new book.
Thank you. You as well. Appreciate go team, go God.
Amen.